Yeah. So yeah, this is our designing the empathy definition project, and so let we can just go around and introduce ourselves. I'll uh, and our background and interest in this project. So Edwin Rutsch from the San Francisco Bay Area, near Berkeley, and I've been working on this topic of empathy for about 14 years. So I've been doing all kinds of different projects. Started the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, which has done all kinds of different, empathy building projects, like all those books back there, for almost 4 rows. They're all books on empathy, and I've interviewed like most of the authors, of those books, and
Mm.
we do projects. We have this training that we do, the Empathy Circle practice, which I co-developed, with a bunch of folks, and then the training, which Lou is kind of one of the core developers of the training. We've done empathy tents, which we take out to public and offer listening and conflict mediation, and Lou and I have done that. And so I'm just looking at there's a need for, it seems to me, for good definition, better definitions of empathy, and a course on that. So that's what I'm wanting to work
Mm.
on. So I don't know,
Yeah.
Lou, do you want to do a bit of an intro?
Sure. So I'm Lou Zweier. I live in Northern California. I've been involved with Edwin and the Center for Culture of Empathy for about 3 or 4 years now, and I helped develop the training with others on empathy circle practice, and we've been doing that training, cohorts of that training, uh, for 2+ years now, and that's been really satisfying. Um, I also have a pretty extensive background in nonviolent communication, taught it,
Mm.
and made media materials about it, educational materials about it with the Center for Nonviolent Communication and with the Bay Area Center for Nonviolent Communication. I
Yeah.
also have training in restorative circles, which is a restorative practice for
Um,
conflict resolution and mending harm in relationships. So that's my background. I've been doing
mm.
communication and conflict resolution for a long time,
Yeah.
and doing empathy circle practice for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Tzofnat, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. So, yeah, I've lived interchangeably in the US and Israel over the past 20 years. Went back to graduate school. I started my career in business. I was marketing and advertising executive when I felt something is really wrong in our culture. I didn't know to explain what it is. It was first in New York City, and then I moved to Israel and actually was in a few startups, and something was wrong for me, and I just one day left all the perks, my car, everything, and just embarked on a new journey, which I didn't know what it is. But the first thing I did was um, I was part of a team that started democratic schools in Israel. So from one school today, there are more than 30. Very interesting experiment. Later, I criticized it a little bit in my dissertation. Um, so that was my first project, but then I got into conflicts. Worked in the Ministry of Justice in Israel, introducing ADR and mediation and restorative justice in the country, and started writing about it and doing consultancy. And at that point, I started publishing and decided to go back to school. So I went back to graduate school. Um, my major interest is transforming, or you already noticed that I'm very much into restructuring our relationships. It took me quite a few years to understand that the culture we live in reinforces separation. And I really explored the topic. So my main interest is shifting from adversarial inclinations into more dialogic. I call it dialogic relations or dialogic being. That's like my thing. And empathy is really is being dialogic. It's the same thing in my opinion. So yeah.
Oh, great. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just going to put in the link here. This is kind of a notes, for this project, and you can, if you go to page 5, you can take any notes, as we talk as
Okay.
well. I just remembered at the last meeting, Violetta mentioned her husband had come home with COVID. So I'm just thinking, oh, maybe she ended up getting it too. So
Yeah.
anyway, just thinking about that. So I wanted to just give a little bit of background, like about this empathy circle, and then we can go into and use the empathy circle practice for the dialogue. So I just made some notes here. So kind of how this has come about, I was working on a project for defining empathy. So I have a little different, model of empathy based on Carl Rogers' work, but different from the cognitive affective model that's out there. And I just found it hard to sort of organize my thoughts, and I've been working with others on it. So I thought to create a training for it, because if I have to kind of organize the material in a way to train others, I've got to, and plus I've got something to bounce off of people, right? Can keep sort of refining it. So I thought, okay, we'll create a 6-week or so training, kind of build it on top of the empathy circle. And so this would be our module 2, because we have the module 1, 5-week facilitator training. Plus, I see that one reason for the definitions is we're trying to create a movement, right? To build a culture of empathy and a movement around that. And you got to be able to define your terms to, if you're going to do something like that. So there's just so much definitional confusion, and I think that that's a block to the development of the movement. So, and I'm hoping that this will be sort of an ongoing project. If we're teaching it, we keep refining it. It just keeps going on, sort of in perpetuity as a class and a refinement, and different papers or articles can come out of this. I'm thinking maybe even a book. So.
Are you in the academia?
I am not. I
No.
have written 3 books on computers, so I come out of the computer field, had worked in high tech
Oh,
in
on
Silicon.
computers.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you typed on the computers. Okay.
Yeah, I'd worked at setting up computer networks. So
Oh,
I
okay.
did create a website, definingempathy.com. So, and then there's a whole, all kinds of material there that we've been collecting. So I've been working at this for some time now. And then I started working with Violetta and Priyanka. And so we've been talking about this in different meetings. But then we thought, well, let's go back to basics. Since the definition is going to be built on the empathy circle, let's go back to starting with the empathy circle and do more of an open-ended sort of an exploration of this topic. And I think that's one of the unique aspects of the definition, is we want to define empathy within the context of the empathy circle. So if we're talking about empathy, our ideas about empathy point to something that's happening in the empathy circle as a demonstration of it. I think that's sort of a unique aspect of and the model, there is a basic model, which glad to talk about that. And here, whatever definitions you're using. And it's empathy as a way of being, and it's founded on, that I sent the email with the link to Carl Rogers' paper, Empathic and Unappreciated Way of Being. And I see that as sort of a foundational, core for the definition that we're doing. So we want to go into doing the empathy circle with a question of how might we design an empathy training module, on defining empathy, maybe take 5-minute turns to begin with, and whatever's alive for you. I don't know. Are you up to taking time, Lou? Would that
Sure, I can keep
work?
time.
So we'll just, talk about whatever's alive for you. We have a recording. We can also get transcripts, also take any notes. And we'll just kind of see kind of what emerges. And so whoever would like to start first, just say whatever's on your mind on this topic. And
So I'm going to keep time on my phone.
yeah, okay.
And when the time is up, a chime will go off. Sometimes on Zoom, people don't hear the chime. If I don't think you're hearing it, I'll hold up the phone as a visual reminder that the time is up.
So I can be the first listener if anyone wants to start, or
Mm.
I'll go first.
okay, I'm listening.
Okay. So the topic is, how might we design a learning module about empathy? Is that right? Did I get that right?
Muted, and I'll put it into the chat too, or whatever's alive for you
Yeah.
around that.
Yeah. So I think designing a module about that's a good idea. I think it'd be good to have that module positioned after the initial facilitator training, because I always worry that if you give too much instruction about empathy and about listening before people start to do it, then it becomes an intellectual process and not heart-centered.
So it kind of reflect that. It's just,
yeah,
okay,
sure.
so you think it's a good idea to have this training, but you'd like to see it as being like a module 2 after the facilitator training, because if it gets too intellectual, it takes it away from the heart. And right now, the other one we have is very experiential.
Right, and people become self-conscious about whether they're doing it correctly or not, and other people start to watch how they're doing it and maybe criticize, like, you're not really listening correctly, that's not empathy what you're doing, and that creates a non-empathic atmosphere in the empathy circle. And so I think it's a really important element of the empathy circle for facilitators, that people are accepted for wherever they are, and that they are able to listen and speak with whatever capacity they do, and that's actually part of being empathic, is that they are accepted for where they are when they are doing the process.
Yeah, so if we start off with the training that's very intellectual, people get into that intellectual mindset, then there's an element of judgment in it. They'll start judging each other instead of kind of being more centered in their heart and body. So it sounds like that's some experience that you've had, so you're kind of wanting to avoid that.
Yes, and that it's important to accept people where they are, and work from there.
Part I guess the miss was seeing where people are, and accept them where they are without judgment.
Yes, I think that's particularly important for facilitators. I've looked over the draft model that you have, which has a bunch of different elements to it, different kinds of empathy. And I think that's probably good. I think, I tend to value simplicity, mostly because if you want something to spread and scale, it has to be simple. If it's complicated, it's hard to understand it and hard to do it. And so I have a bias towards things that are simple, but not simplistic.
Yeah. So you really would like the train to have a simple aspect to it, because then it can scale. People can take it on easier, but not be simplistic. And sounds like you were sort of you looked at the existing outline, and I don't quite sure. You sort of thought it was okay, but maybe wanted to be sure that it stayed simple. Not.
Yes, actually, I'm not sure. It might be a little too complicated. I'm not sure. But that'll be something to explore, and it's something to experiment with. And it's certainly okay in the development process to do something that's got a lot more stuff, and then to maybe simplify it if it needs that.
Yeah, so maybe it'll need to be simplified. You're not sure yet. You just need to maybe experiment with it, try it out.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll say again, I think it's an important aspect of development or creative process that you generate a lot, and then you figure out what to use and what not to use. So I'm certainly not trying to throw cold water on anything that you've done. I think it's great that you're exploring as much as you are.
Yeah, it's sort of as a process. You have a lot of ideas, and you kind of narrow it down, and so you don't want to be sounding negative or throwing cold water on what I've done so far.
Thanks. That's my time. I feel heard. Thank you.
Okay, Tzofnat, can I speak to you?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've talked to a lot of these academics, about empathy, and there's a lot of criticisms, about empathy, and I think it's because there's sort of not a clear definition or understanding of it. So I see this as a really important and kind of exciting project.
So you saying that you spoke with many academics and you heard a lot of criticism, and it seems to you that there's no clear definition of the concept.
Yeah, I'm very much based on Carl Rogers' work of empathizing into others, but it seems that academia have kind of gone off into this affective cognitive model, which I find has a lot of problems.
Okay, so you feel very connected to Carl Rogers' approach or perspective, and you see that there's like a trend in the academia to go into like the cognitive way of looking at empathy.
Yeah, cognitive, and using even terms like cognitive and affective. Lou had talked about, let's keep it simple. It's like cognitive and affective are not simple terms, in my opinion. It's like, it's too complicated. It's like, so.
So you saying it's takes the turn of cognitive by cognitive and what's the other one?
Affective, meaning feeling.
Affective or effective?
Affective.
Affect,
So
like feeling, like
feelings.
emotion.
It's about emotions and feelings. So it's a very technical term. So even you're stumbling over it because it's such just say feelings instead of affective, right? So keep it simple,
So you connect to what Lou said about simplicity, and it seems like that academia is going more complex, or something is not simple in the way they incorporate cognition and affection.
Yeah.
Okay, got you.
So so I really resonate with Lou's keeping it simple, but it can't be too simplistic, and how to find that balance is the thing to do. And Lou's a master facilitator. He's just like, he's so good.
Okay, so you resonate with keeping it simple but not simplistic, and you say how much Lou is a great facilitator, a good facilitator, maybe effective, or you don't like the word
He's
effective.
just grounded. Yeah, he's just very grounded and centered
Grounded.
and calm and sensitive. Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to reflect that?
Yeah. So you're saying that is very Lou is very grounded and of a facilitator. Yeah.
Yeah, and with all these interviews, I've battled it out with all the academics. the
Mhm.
writers who've written, against empathy, the dark side of empathy, et cetera, et cetera. I've sort of battled this model that I have in my head, which I kind of been putting on paper. I've been using that model to discuss empathy with all these all these authors. So I feel pretty confident in the basic model, but how to convey it in simple terms, I guess, is the question.
Yeah. So you bottle the way it is being viewed in the academia, and you feel pretty comfortable with what you're thinking about empathy, but you feel that you need um some help or others people thoughts as to how to communicate that what you have in your head.
Yeah, and I find it kind of working together with people, I can bounce ideas off of them and sort of build on it. So I just find the sort of these dialogues to be helpful for my own
Yeah,
clarity.
yeah. You find the interaction or the dialogue with other people refining and helping to communicate the ideas that you have, but they are not coherent maybe
Yeah,
now. Yeah.
yeah, I feel heard, fully heard, and that was my time.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so yeah, I definitely connect to, I like to say,
Who are you
I
speaking
love,
to? I imagine you're speaking to
oh,
Lou,
that's
but you
right.
should
Who am I?
choose.
But Lou, right? Because
Okay,
it's like a
sure.
circle.
Yeah, sure.
So I like to say, I like to develop simple models that capture complexity. So this is like my thing. I love to, and I think I also try to do it in the what I sent you, and this is one of my models. The transformative empathy, like keep it very simple, like it's inner and outer dialogue, like that's the idea, and how to do it, the mechanism is more detailed, but that's the basic idea.
Yeah, so you're saying that you really resonate with this idea of trying to keep it simple, but not simplistic. And you think one of your superpowers, one of the things you're really good at, is is capturing complexity in simple models.
Well, I don't know if I'm good about that, but I'm trying.
So it's a strong desire of yours.
Yeah, I try to do it in everything that I do. And one of the reasons, and that's like another aspect that I like to keep in this work with you also, is the connection between aspirations and reality. Meaning that if we develop an empathy model, I would like people to experiment that model in everyday life so that we get back their experiences and keep developing it all the time.
Yeah, so you're saying another thing you think is really important is that it's fine to have theories and models, but those things have to actually work in the real world and they need to be practical. And so you very much like a cycle of
Mhm.
developing things and then testing them out and getting feedback and developing them some more to
Yeah,
make
like,
sure
yeah,
that the theory actually is works in practice.
right. It's like a cycle. It's an ongoing, never-ending cycle of learning and evolving and learning from our experiences. Um, so yeah, that's something that I would like to see if we develop such a course to have this interaction between what we have in the room, the training room, and what's going on outside, and it keeps moving and evolving.
Yeah, so that process of developing a theory and then a practice and then using it and and then having a feedback loop that informs theory and practice. You see that as a continuous cycle of improvement that goes
Yeah,
on. It like never ends. So it
yeah,
isn't just a
right.
development period, but it's a continuous process.
Yeah, yeah. I can tell you that when I write a paper or an article, never ends. I don't know how people publish. It's really hard for me because there is always, when I get back to an article, I always have something to say about what I wrote yesterday. So
Yeah, so that continuous improvement process, that's something actually that's been a little bit of a devil for you in the writings that you've done, because you write and then you go back to it, and there's always something that you want to add, and so you're challenged actually to say, when am I finished with something, and publishing it.
yeah, yeah. So nothing is complete in life, I think, as long as we are alive.
Yeah, and you're saying life is a continuous process. If we are alive, then we're evolving and modifying ourselves.
Yeah. Yes, I think this is the two major points about experimenting with training in empathy, is the connection between um, aspirations and reality, and theory and practice. Um, and yeah,
Yes, you just feel really strongly about that point, about balancing or integrating aspirations and reality and theory and practice, and to make sure
yeah,
that,
yeah. And
that
just to finalize, and the balance, or reflecting complexity in simple ways.
yeah, and that process, the purpose of that process is to try to reflect reality in simple ways so that people can use it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So I'll go back to Tzofnat. Is that all right with you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm very much resonate with all the things that you just said. So totally on the same page about that. Um, Although it's interesting with the empathy circle practice, and I would never say, well, no, we'll never change it, and it's perfect. We've been doing it a long time, and we don't need to do anything to it. But I would say that we have been doing it a long time, and it is pretty effective. And uh, yeah, um, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, so you're saying that you resonate with some things that I said, and that the empathy circle is pretty effective, proved to be pretty effective in your work. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so, to the degree that people have come and said, oh, I think you should do this differently or this differently, or, like what's happening in the empathy circle isn't actually empathy. It's just listening. People are just reflecting back. They're not really talking about feelings or needs like the way nonviolent communication describes them. So so a lot of that is true, and I think what makes me confident in the process that we are doing is that um, it's the right place to start, and that the empathy circle develops the capacity for people to listen to each other empathically. Uh, but it doesn't. There's no guarantee that empathy will happen in the circle. It's just it helps develop that capacity. I'll stop there.
Yeah. So you talked about the criticism about empathy circles, that some people say it's just listening circles. And you say that it's true in a way, but it's a good way to start, where people can learn to listen. You start by listening, and then it evolves or develops into empathy.
Yeah, because people come into the circle with different capacities to
Right.
hear one another and even to speak about what's going on in them.
Yeah.
And so, and being empathic, I mean, creating a culture of empathy in the circle means accepting people where they are.
Mhm.
And the process of listening to them helps them understand themselves better. And when they do that, they understand others better. I'll stop there.
So you're saying people come to the circle with different capacities, and just listening and reflecting other people in the circle forces them to accept them as they are. So that is the way to develop empathy.
Yeah,
Is
it's
it?
not the matter that it forces them to accept people the way they are, but it's more um, um, well, people do feel accepted by being listened to, yes.
Mhm.
And I think that when people are listened to well, they understand themselves more. And when they understand themselves more, they begin to understand others more. I'll stop there.
So people feel accepted by being listened to, and then they accept themselves more, and then other people accept them. It's like a chain of acceptance. Is that
Yes,
what?
although the last piece actually is when people start to accept themselves more, they start to understand others more and are more accepting.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
been my
So
experience.
if they accept themselves more, they start understanding other people more.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I
Mhm.
think, you know, it's interesting thinking about this. I'm thinking it through while I'm saying it to you. I'm realizing that, and that's actually one of the reasons to have a skilled facilitator in the group. Because at least if one person in the group is really listening to people well and like hearing them deeply, you know, having real empathy, other people are learning from that. If nobody in the circle has that, then right, there isn't a lot of learning going on about how to listen to people so that they're really understood.
So you're talking about the importance of a facilitator who does have the skills of listening, and he serves or she serves as a modeling for other participants to exercise listening and empathy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I feel heard.
Uh-huh. Mhm. Mhm.
You're up again. Tzofnat.
It's me.
Yep. Select your listener.
I will go back to the link and who is doing this for me? Edwin,
Yep.
why
Listening.
don't you try now? So I'm like struggling now with like how far can we go with this empathy circle that we are doing, like one person expresses themselves and the other is reflecting. Like, what am I missing here? Like something feels missed for me.
Yeah, you're like, where can we go? You're wondering, where can we go here in the empathy circle with this sort of one person speaking, one listening? Because it seems like something's missing for you. It sounds like you want to sort of explore that.
And maybe it's like in a laboratory, and life is not a laboratory, and it is in other ways. Um, but I like to have it more dirty and complex, emotional, maybe the things that you didn't like in the academia, but I do want people to learn how to embrace complexity, because people are complex.
Yeah, you see that people are complex, and this seems like a laboratory where it's not complex, but and you would like to have, you like things more dirty, somehow more, maybe more chaotic, or
It's clean, you know, in life
mm,
um we experience sometimes difficult emotional experiences, and this is where this tool should come into life and help us to be a different way.
so life is more messy, and you want to be able to experience that messiness, and this is maybe a bit sterile, or you, and you'd like to use this to kind of address the messiness of life.
Yeah. So and I think if we manage to find a way or ways to do that in this training, then it becomes very useful and practical for people.
So you'd like
There's no
the
separation
mhm.
between the training and life.
Yeah, you'd like the training to really affect life, so that when you're in life, that the training is sort of helping you or supporting you in just regular everyday life. So it has sort of a practical aspect.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure how to do it, but this is my thinking. This is where I am now. I'm like trying to think how to make it more similar to the complexity of life, but still structured.
hmm Yeah, how to make it more similar to the complexity of life, but still have structure, and you're sort of weighing that sort of
Yeah.
those two.
Yeah, because structure is really I find it really helpful for people to deal with complexity. People need structure. So I do want to maintain structure and at the same time be able to address the complexity of life.
Yeah, you're seeing that people appreciate structure. Sounds like you appreciate structure, but yet you'd like the complexity of life to somehow be addressed as well. So sounds like you're not quite sure how to do that. You're sort of sitting with that ambiguity.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you feel hurt, or
Yeah, I
okay?
feel heard, and
Oh,
that's
great.
enough for now.
Yeah, I'll speak back to you then. Yeah, I- people, I would like to say all of life is structure. There is no non-structure out there. Even what you consider, for me at least, is chaos. There's a structure in the chaos. You just might not be aware of it.
So you're saying all life is structured, even if we don't notice the structure, we don't see the structure?
hmm And the typical structure would be, maybe in a group, is whoever is the most aggressive and the most assertive will get heard the most. So that's the structure. There's a hierarchy. Who's ever the most assertive is going to get the most attention, for example.
So you're talking about structure in the way people interact, and there's hierarchy, and who is being heard and who is not being heard in the context. I assume you're talking about the context we live in.
Yeah, if you go home, like, I don't know, I think you must, I guess Lou is Jewish, you're Jewish, you hear about Jewish families, everybody argues, and or that's sort of the stereotype, right? They're all talking at once and nobody's listening, is kind of this stereotype. So I'm wondering if that is what you're meaning by kind of out in regular life, where everybody's just kind of talking over each other and kind of not listening. There's sort of this argumentation sort of approach. So yeah.
So you're giving an example for, maybe you meant complexity, but I'm not sure, of a Jewish family that talks, everyone talks at the same time. And I don't know if you asked me if that's what I meant.
Yeah, I'm just
asking-
speculating on this. That's just what came
You're
to mind.
speculating. Okay, but you see, this is a point to reflect on, I think, reflection in
Mhm.
action, like Sean. So is this a point that we want maybe to have an interaction between people, or we keep reflecting?
We
I'm just
keep reflecting. Yeah, we
I
keep
know,
reflecting.
I
Yeah.
know. But that's a question for me. Maybe
Mhm.
it's an opportunity to do something else. But
Mhm. Yeah, it's a different way, how people relate. There's all kinds of different ways people relate. Like, I have a German background, and people are very reserved. There's just no conflict, keep things very reserved, and like that. So and every family is kind of like different, right? So when we say out in the regular life, I'm just kind of like, there's a lot of different varieties of regular life. Yeah.
yeah, so you're talking about the different structures and normalities, and you didn't say, but maybe habits of different contexts and families and cultures. So what's normality is different in those different contexts.
And one thing with the empathy circle, like I've done family empathy circles, like we're doing empathic listening like this. And it would be after like 2 or 3 hours, maybe more like 3 hours, when we did like 4-hour empathy circles, there's almost a shift. And you can just feel a shift where the willingness to listen to everyone fully, and that spirit almost gets normalized, and you don't even need to do the reflective listening anymore, because we've sort of shifted how we're really listening to each other, and people aren't on edge and worried about, hey, am I going to get hurt or not?
So you're saying that over time you see the effect of empathy circles, like the structure of going, around with listening and reflecting, that there's like maybe people become calm, and they build confidence in them being heard and having a place to express themselves.
Exactly. And that's sort of the empathy. It's like for me, we're empathizing all the time, even if we were talking, there's an empathy going on. But the empathy circle is a bit like training wheels that trains us how to really listen and fully let someone be heard. And it's that's not, it's not real typical in society, so.
So you're saying that the structure of listening and expressing, and it keeps going on. It's something that is not natural in our society.
It's natural. It's as natural as anything else. I would say the structure is as natural. All structures, everything is sort of structured. So, yeah, so it's as natural as anything else, I would say, at a kind of an existential level.
I'm not sure I'm following you here. So you're saying the cycle of listening and reflecting, it is natural, as many other structures are natural?
Yeah,
Is that what
exactly.
you're
I
saying?
feel fully heard.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure I understood, but
I felt understood. Yeah. Thanks. You're up again.
yeah, so maybe Lou now. Yeah, for me the complexity is not everyone talking at the same time. It's about experiencing life on many, many levels of emotions, pain, and being happy and being surprised, and then having disagreement, like the full broad aspects of experiencing something. So this is something that is important for me, to have people around you who understand these dynamics.
Yeah, so you're saying that complexity for you is not everyone speaking at once. It just has to do with the richness of expression and understanding. So things that include thoughts, emotions, disagreements, yeah, and in other words, a very rich kind of expression, and that you like to be surrounded by people who understand that richness and accept that that's how relating happens.
Yeah, if we're talking about what is natural, this is natural for me.
Mm-hmm.
Natural for me is not being fixed, or if I said something now, I can't change my mind in my next sentence. That's not natural.
Yeah, and so you're saying the kind of complexity that you described, that's what you think is natural, that that's what the way human beings naturally are, and that being fixed and being held to something that you said at one time that that's how you should feel or think at another time, that that's you don't think that's natural.
Yeah, and I think the acceptance of people being complex, sometimes feel low, sometimes high, happy, sad, not coherent sometimes, that's what can help us. If we embrace that, that can help us to bridge differences, to be more inclusive.
Yeah, so you're saying that acceptance of where a person is and how they're feeling and what they're thinking, or that they're not clear about what they're thinking. Acceptance of all of that is part of what uh, helps people understand themselves and helps people understand differences with others.
Yeah, I think if we understand that we are a whole and not perfect, meaning we fail, we succeed, we are effective, we are ineffective. It's like the dynamics of life. We can be more creative, more embracing of ourselves and others.
Yeah, so you're saying part of that acceptance is like accepting that we're not perfect and we don't always know the answer and we don't know what we're doing and we're experimenting and we may fail. And that's just part of the complexity of life. And acceptance of that is part of what helps people understand each other and grow and yeah, be alive
And connect.
and
The
connect with each other.
connection, yeah, connection is really important. And if we are fixed that I am right and you are wrong, it's hard to establish connection. But when I know that this is what I think now, and I might change after I listen to you, maybe I'll evolve, and I can understand better your feelings, and it creates connection.
So part of that fixed mindset you're talking about is thinking in terms of right and wrong and trying to figure out who's right and wrong, and that you think what's better is having an openness, that I'm listening to you and I might be affected by what you say, so I might feel one thing one time, but after I listen to you I might feel differently, that's more either better or more alive, something like that.
It's more connecting.
Or
It's
connecting, right?
connecting,
Sorry, more
yeah,
connecting.
it's connecting us. Yeah. Um, when we understand that there's no one way to do things, there are multiple ways of doing things, and it just keeps changing. And if everything keeps changing, there's no reason to really reason to fight over something that might sound, when we think things are fixed, then we are like trying to claim the truth, but there's no truth. So
Yeah, so you're saying that if you accept that life and relating is a process, and that people listen to each other and talk and change their position or change their thinking about how to do something, then that is more connecting and it's more it helps people stay out of the kind of right-wrong thinking, and that there's only one way to do something, and so then we have to fight over what is the right way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so the other way is more creates, it's more relational, it creates more connection.
Yeah, thank you. I feel heard.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So who's next now?
So I'm speaking. I'll speak to Edwin.
Yeah.
Listening.
Yeah, so I was really happy to hear Tzofnat talk about that, because the before you had talked about relational empathy, or bringing relationality into more into the empathy circle, and I wanted to understand more what that was about, and I'm starting to understand it, I think, from things that you've said. Stop there.
So you're sorry, you heard Tzofnat say she wanted to bring more relationality into the empathy circle, and from what she's saying, you're starting to get a sense of what she's really meaning, and I think you're appreciating that. Sounds like you want to really understand what she means.
Yeah, and I'd say, listening to what you were saying, Tzofnat, I would say I agree with Edwin that the strength of the empathy circle is that it is training wheels
Mm-hmm.
for people that have a lot of bad habits, a lot of bad listening habits. And if you just have a regular conversation with a group of 4 or 5 people, very, very predictable dynamics happen, which is the people that are verbal talk a lot, the people that are very opinionated talk a lot, and other people don't. And people don't get a sense that they're heard, because there's not much reflection or understanding going on. And the structure of the empathy circle interrupts those bad habits and kind of forces people to listen to one another. I'll stop there.
So you're seeing that there are these sort of blocks to empathy, these bad habits that people have, and that the structure of the empathy circle helps address that for people to feel heard.
Yeah, and I agree, Tzofnat, that people that have a lot of awareness and a lot of skills, can have just a conversation in a group, or between 2 people, or in a group, and people are aware of how much people are talking, and whether we've heard from someone or not, and whether whether there's a little bit of reflection that needs to happen, so the person knows that they're feeling heard.
Mm-hmm.
But that level of skill in communication is rare, in my experience.
Yeah, so in your experience, people getting together and really being sensitive to each other and listening to each other is a rare skill.
And I would say, even with people who have a lot of skill and a lot of awareness, when you're talking about things that are charged or difficult, people lose themselves. I certainly do. And so structure helps with that also.
So, having that sense of awareness of each other, not everybody has that, but even people who do have it, that if things get a little charged, you can lose that sensitivity.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think is really interesting, and I had a session right before this, Empathy Circle Facilitator session, where we were talking about various topics, and one of them was, can the listener ask questions of the speaker? And so it started this whole conversation about that in the Empathy Circle practice, the idea is to follow the speaker, not lead the speaker. And so the listener reflects back to let the speaker continue on their journey, feel heard, and continue on their journey of thinking through what they want to say. And I do think that it is different than being driven by somebody's inquiry of you. And I think there's great value in following the speaker.
So in the empathy circle, you're following the speaker, you're accompanying them, and the question came up, as a listener, can you ask questions? But that's sort of directing the person instead of just following them. And there's a subtle difference. There's a real benefit to just following someone.
Yeah, because often questions are really an attempt to satisfy the listener's curiosity, and not so much to support the speaker in their journey of following their own thinking. And both have value. I'm not saying that they don't, but it's yeah, it's there is great value in people experiencing just being followed on their journey.
So both asking questions and just following people both have value, and there is just the following people has a great value as well.
Yeah, my time's up, but I'm going to say one more thing,
Yeah.
which is that I think it's also true that a lot of the questioning comes from the listener's desire to teach the speaker something, and that is um, that's also one of the problems with letting people ask questions, is that desire for the listener to think they know more, or they have an insight, or they think that the speaker should understand something more, and that they want to teach them something, that gets in the way of people's own internal journey or their own process.
Yeah. So if the listener is asking questions, you'd mentioned before, it's about satisfying their own curiosity at one level. So it's about them and their curiosity. And the second part is that it's about them perhaps trying to teach the speaker something, or trying to get something instead of just being present with the speaker.
Yes, thank you. I feel heard.
Okay, I'll speak back to you then. So the framework, with the definition of empathy being a way of being, it's how we are, and that way of being, it's based on Rogers, paper, empathic and unappreciated way of being. So this way of being, empathic, being sensitive to each other, he's saying it's an unappreciated way of being, and I would say it's also a very core aspect to who we are as human beings.
Yeah, so you're describing that the kind of empathy that we use in the empathy circle, which is just trying to be with the person, that idea of following the listener, that really comes from Carl Rogers and his paper, Empathy, Unappreciated Way of Being. And you think that that is very effective, and that it is unappreciated.
Yeah, and it is a way of being. It's just like, it's a human nature. We have that human capacity to be highly empathic, just as, we relate with each other. And so I see that as just a natural way and then there's blocks to that way of being, things that block or inhibit that way of being.
So you think that that kind of empathic presence, that way of being, is natural for human beings, that we're wired for that, and that other things that we learn to do are block us from that.
Mm-hmm. And you're laying out some of the blocks. Asking questions can be a block, right? It's like, instead of being in that empathic space where we're really listening to each other, if you're asking all these questions and sort of directing it, it can be inhibiting of an empathic way of being or empathic connection.
Yeah, so you're agreeing that asking questions can be a block, one of the blocks that happens often to just being present empathically.
And another block is, I think what Tzofnat is mentioning, is a fixed mindset. So I'm just trying to think of, how do we model a fixed mindset, within the empathy circle, for example.
Yeah, so another block that you think happens a lot is a fixed mindset, and you're wondering how does a fixed mindset show up in an empathy circle?
Yeah, how could we role play it, right, in the empathy circle? Like, and it would be me speaking now, instead of you listening, you would say, no, you're wrong. This is how we should do it. there's another way of doing it. So instead of just listening to me, giving me empathy, being present with where I am, you would be trying to share your fixed mindset with me.
Yeah, so you're saying the way you think fixed mindset would show up in an empathy circle would be the listener saying, not reflecting empathically, but having a fixed idea of what is right or wrong about what you're saying, and telling you about it.
Yeah. And the thing with the empathy circle is it allows for all of that in when it's your turn. So when it's your turn, you can be as fixed as you want. You can ask as many questions as you want. You can be judgmental. You can do whatever you want when it's your turn to speak. So it does create space for all those ways of being.
Yeah, so you're saying that an important aspect of the empathy circle is it does make space for all ways of being, because when you're the speaker, you can say whatever you want. So if you have judgmental things or you have ideas that you think are right or wrong, you can express them when it's your turn to speak.
Yeah, so and your questions will be heard to your satisfaction. So your questions will be empathized with and heard to your satisfaction. Your fixed mindset will be met. Yeah, your questions are met. Whoever you are is met with empathy first.
Yeah, so you're saying the questions that come up for listeners, they have a place to express them. You can express your questions when it's your turn to speak, and in that way, anything that you're experiencing that you want to express when it's your turn would be heard and understood.
And I feel fully heard.
Okay. I'll go to Tzofnat.
How
So-
long are we gonna do it today?
We usually go
did
2
you find
hours.
out? Oh, it's 2 hours?
So we have about 50 minutes.
Okay.
So I'll speak to you. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. I was looking at some notes I made about things that were said earlier. Do I want to go back to them? No, most of them have been covered. So the one note that I think is interesting was about when Edwin was describing how when he does empathy circles or has done empathy circles with his family, after about 3 hours, enough trust has been created that people have confidence that they are being heard, and that whatever they want to express is welcome. That the process can kind of be dropped away, and that even reflection can be dropped away, because people don't need the reflection to know that they're being heard. They trust that, and I think that the truth of that validates what Tzofnat is saying about trying to integrate empathy circle practice into everyday life. And that the problem in everyday life is that we don't have the trust. The trust is not there. There isn't enough trust. I'll stop there.
So you talked about Edwin's experience with family circles and how the trust is built over time, so that people sometimes drop the reflection or other parts because they feel so confident that they are being heard, and if they haven't been heard, they will have the space to be heard. Yeah, so you said that, and then you added something afterwards, which I'm not sure I remember.
About how that truth
To
relates
the
to
reality.
integrating it into real life. Yeah.
Right, yeah. So you talked about how this process of building trust relates to everyday life.
Yeah, and that in everyday life there generally isn't enough trust in our relationships when there's difficulty to know fully that we are heard. And I guess the other thing that happens is the amount of trust that I feel is not fixed. It goes up and down. So something might happen and I feel vulnerable. I don't know that if I feel, and so I might, if I express myself, I might need a reflection from the other person to know that I'm heard. Whereas if I was feeling more confident in that moment, I wouldn't be needing a reflection. So the amount of trust that is present between two people just varies. It's variable.
Yeah. So you're saying that typically we don't have enough trust in everyday life, and it's also changing depending on the interaction. Sometimes if we have enough trust, we don't need the whole structure of reflecting and so forth. But when we don't, it helps us to gain trust, the
Yeah.
structure.
Yes, and this is bringing up for me when I teach other communication models. One of the things I say is you don't have to use all the components of the model all the time. What's important is to know them and to be aware of them so that when communication starts to go bad, you can recognize what parts are needed and you can start using them. But of course, that requires a lot of facility and a lot of awareness.
So you're saying that it's similar to other models that you teach. I assume non-violence communication, for example, but you didn't say that. So you don't need to use all the components that are included in the model, but you have to be aware of them to know what is the need at the moment that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and people who are learning a new communication practice, they can be very tiresome because they're using all the parts all the time,
Right.
and that's not needed. But then they also need the practice in it, so that it's it's a conundrum when you're trying to learn new communication skills. It's hard to change habits of thinking and communicating. So again, that's where structure helps with that.
Yeah. So you say that the structure is important because we're trying to change habits, and it helps us to really make a change. The new structure that we are practicing.
Yeah. Thank you. I feel it.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so it's me. Um, so yeah, I'll go back to you, Lou.
Okay.
So I'm like in a questioning mindset on both levels. I am questioning, and also we talked about questions. I mean, and there was a lot of say about when we ask questions, it's more about the listener, less about the person who is being listened to.
Yeah, so you're returning to the topic of questions, and you like a questioning mindset, and you're remembering that we were making this or bringing up the point that if the listener is asking questions of the speaker, that often that can be the listener trying to satisfy their curiosity.
Right. And that assumption bothers me in a way, because I think there's an assumption here that we are bounded, that we have everything within, and we just need to let people express themselves.
Yeah, so you're uncomfortable with the assumption that the questions by the listener are to satisfy their own curiosity. You don't like that assumption. And then the second point you made was that just following the speaker by reflecting them has an assumption in it that people are self-contained and they actually don't need other people, and that all you need to do is express what's inside of you, and you don't need anything from outside in order to whatever, understand yourself better or be in relationships, something like that.
Right. Yeah. So it actually has a conflict with my belief and experience that the major way for us to learn and improve is through interactions.
Yeah, so you're thinking that there might be a conflict here between the empathy circle practice and what we were saying about following the listener, and your experience and your belief that you know, we only understand ourselves really through interactions with other people.
I wouldn't say only, but we develop and improve through interactions. We grow through interactions. We expand our mind through interacting with other perspectives and other people's thinking.
Yeah, so you're saying that what you understand and believe is that we grow and develop through interacting with other people, and not only that, but largely through that. And do you think that's really important?
Yeah, because otherwise it's like billiard balls, they clash, but they don't change. And I hesitate to practice this wonderful practice of empathy circle with leaving those bil uh, billiard balls untapped. I want them to change.
Yeah, so you're making an analogy between what happens in empathy circle practice, where people listen to each other but they don't interact, as like billiard balls that hit each other but they don't really affect one another. They just bounce off, and
Yeah.
you have a strong desire to have that interaction to help people grow and change.
And when I ask a question, I mean, I realize what you are saying, that sometimes you said that most of the times people ask questions because they try to direct the listener to their point of view. I can relate to that. At the same time, we can ask questions with curiosity and from the way we are, just to trigger thought, to provoke thought, to clarify and refine both thought thinking minds, like myself and the other.
Yeah, so you're saying on the point that I was making about questions are sometimes about the listener trying to teach the speaker something. You're saying that um, that questions can also just be genuine curiosity, and can be a learning opportunity for both the speaker and the listener, or the speaker and the question asker, and that it's that again, that interaction you think is what helps people grow and is important.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like being
Okay.
heard.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll go to Edwin.
Listening.
Yeah, so I agree with you, Tzofnat. So what's emerging for me from this conversation really has to do with trust. So when 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 two people, well, so if you were to ask me questions, if I was trusting that in asking me questions you were just trying to understand me better, or trying to support me in thinking about what I'm thinking about, then there really wouldn't be any problem with the questions. I think the problem is that often in conversations, and particularly conversations that are difficult, the there isn't enough trust that the questions are just curious and trying to be helpful, that the questions are more about interrogating and trying to prove the foolishness of what you're thinking, the error of it, and try to get you to see the error of your ways. I'll stop there.
So you're agreeing with Tzofnat about how if there's a lot of, well, you're sort of adding the quality of trust, that if there's a lot of trust in a relationship, the questions are positive, or and if there's low trust, then it's kind of more problematic. I don't know if I quite got that. I don't think so.
Yeah. And the other thing that happens in regular conversation has to do with the speed of exchanges. And one of the things that the empathy circle structure does is it slows down the speed of exchanges, which both helps the speaker to reflect more on what they are thinking. And it also helps the speaker to feel more accepted, because the speed at which some alternative to what they are thinking gets presented. I'll stop there.
So another quality of the empathy circle is the slowing down of the conversation. It's not as speedy, and then with the slower pace, it gives more ability to sort of the speaker to connect with themselves.
Yeah, because something I'm very aware of that happens in regular conversation, particularly conversations that are difficult, is that the speed with which the one person responds to another has a big impact on whether the speaker has felt heard or not. And so, yeah, whether what the person said has been reflected at all, and the speed with which something else has said has a big impact on whether the speaker feels heard or not. And so, unless you have a lot of awareness and skill in conversation, those things often don't go well.
So especially with some tension or conflict, that there's this element of speed, that if the person is responding right away, and there's not sort of that space, that the speaker just doesn't really feel heard from that. So that quality of speed is that being so fast kind of causes a problem.
Yeah. Now, I did grow up in a large family of 5 kids, and I had a lot of aunts and uncles. So when we had a family gathering, there were like 40 people there. So I grew up in a culture where people were loud and talked a lot and had strong opinions. And I did learn from that not to take things personally, and not to be afraid of loud, opinionated conversation. And in that way, I am different than other people I know who are less used to that.
So you did grow up in a large family, 40 extended relatives, and you're comfortable with sort of a loud, opinionated family, and you have a sense of comfort. You don't take it personally, and other people may not don't have the same awareness.
So I think that's an interesting, element to this too, is culturally, what are you used to culturally?
Yeah, so what you're used to, from your family culturally, that's another factor.
And I'll just say, well, no, I'll stop there. Go ahead.
I'll speak back to you, Luke. Then.
All right.
I'm still trying to understand Tzofnat's reticence, or kind of questioning of the empathy circle. So somehow it seems like she wants more of a integrative, or I don't know, a natural flow or something. I'm trying to sort of understand it. She wants to overcome the individualism somehow.
Yeah, so you're reflecting some on what Tzofnat's trying to maybe enlarge or shift or add something to the empathy circle practice. You're not sure exactly what that would look like, and you're like kind of curious about what that might look like. The relational things that she's been saying, how would that change the empathy circle if we were trying to do that more?
Yeah, so there is one of the facets. So the definition of empathy is a way of being that has many facets, like a diamond. You know, has a lot of different facets. It's one thing, but there's different facets, and we can look at and sort of describe the different facets of it. I'll pause there.
Yeah, so you're saying that your definition of empathy that you are trying to bring to the empathy circle practice is multifaceted. So there isn't one way of doing it or one way of looking at it. And so you are trying to incorporate a kind of a multi-dimensional view of it.
And one of the facets is empathy with others. So right now you're listening to me. I sense you empathizing with me, sensing into, hearing me and accompanying me. So that's empathy with another.
Yeah, and so empathy, having empathy for someone, being an empathic presence, you're experiencing that happening right now in the circle. You see both of us, you're speaking and you're watching both of us, and we seem to be present with you.
And the other part is self-empathy. So I'm kind of looking inside my body, what's arising, what's bubbling up. So I would call that self-empathy, sensing into my own body and sharing that. So you're listening, empathizing with me is actually supporting me in my self-empathy.
Yeah, so another one of the facets is self-empathy, which means feeling yourself and sharing that if you decide to, and that our empathic presence of sitting here being with you, it helps you do that.
And another facet is relational empathy. And I think that's where Tzofnat is looking at is what is relational empathy? And that's sort of the sense of the whole here, that there's, if I look at the screen here, I see all three of us and there's a feeling of the whole, a sense and awareness of the whole. And that's what I'm calling sort of relational empathy, looking not just at me as an individual or just one other person, but any group that there's a quality of empathy in that group.
So another facet is what you're calling relational empathy, and you're saying that relational empathy is what's going on in the group as a whole, and kind of being aware of that or sensitive to that, and is the group as a whole being
What's the
empathic?
level? Yeah, what's the level of empathy in the group?
What's the level of empathy in the
Yeah.
group? Okay.
And one way to kind of play with that relational empathy is the pronouns we use, right? It's like, I hear you say, or you're saying, we're using the pronouns. I guess those are pronouns. Is that a pronoun, or it's I and you, right? It's like we're using that in the discussion here, which creates a sense of self and other, right?
Yeah, so one of the things, so something that you just talked about was that the way that we refer to each other, like I and you in the talking, is that creates a relationship. That's relational. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
it's a sense of individual. It creates an individual. I as an individual, you as an individual, I and you. That it creates that difference between us. You're the you, and I'm the I. So
Yeah, so you're saying that that aspect of saying I and you as we go back and forth, that reinforces individuality or acknowledges individuality.
and I had played with using we. So it's like we are feeling, and then the reflection is we are feeling. So we don't use I and you. Everything is a we, and we speak from a we. Yeah.
So something you considered doing was using we instead of you and I, with the idea that, that in the expression, someone would say we, and in the reflection, the reflector would say we, as with the idea of trying to reinforce the collectiveness,
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
relational aspect of it.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I feel fully heard.
Okay. I'll go to Tzofnat.
Right.
Okay, so it's so interesting that just this last piece that you said about using we instead of I, boy, did that rub me the wrong way. It's like I hate it when people, um, it really triggers me when I'm in a conversation or somebody's saying something and they say we, like they're speaking for everyone, and it's like, speak for yourself. Don't assume you know what I am feeling. And I think I have such a strong reaction to that because I have seen people think that they know what others are feeling and they really have no idea.
So you're saying that the we triggers you, triggers a rejection. It seems like people say we, they know how you're feeling, uh, um, and it's not something you that resonates you. The
Yeah.
we.
Well, and I have experienced many times people assuming that they understand what other people are feeling or thinking, and they don't. They're wrong about it. Yeah.
So the people assume that they know how you're feeling, and they wrong. They don't know
Right.
how you're feeling. Mhm.
The other thing I moved to talk about is Safna, when you talked about how the taking turns speaking and the
Mhm.
structure of the empathy circle, how that creates a separateness, and that you were saying that interaction, like the questions from others or the interaction we have, that is how people learn. I would say that um, that is happening in the empathy circle. It's just happening in a very slowed down way because I am hearing what you are saying. And if you have questions about what I say that you speak about when it's your speaking turn, I'm hearing those questions and I may decide to respond to them. So it's not as though the empathy circle really is me only being reflected and never hearing from you or never hearing from someone else. So I think I do hear different perspectives and I do hear questions about what I'm saying and I might hear disagreement with what I'm saying. I think all of that interaction happens. It just happens in a very slowed down way. And I think there are some advantages to that. There's some benefits to that, and there are also some uh, disadvantages to that.
So you saying you refer to my point about stressing the interaction, and you're saying it does happen in empathy circle. You didn't say over time, but I'm interpreting it as over time. Because you listen to the other person and the other person listens to you over time. So the interaction is not at the moment. You said it's slower. It's slower. But it does happen. It does take place. Listening to other people, their perspectives, and maybe changing your perspective as a result of it.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Mhm.
yeah, and their questions too, if they have them and they choose to express them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, if every conversation that I had in life was used this, had this structure to it, I would go crazy. I mean, I would not like that. So there is a certain um, not I don't want to say artificialness to there is a certain amount of structure that yes would be very tiresome if that structure had to be present all the time. Um, in the same way that if you understand like good communication and you have a model that you use for good communication, it would be very tiresome if you used all the components of the model every time. Um,
Oh, wow.
yeah, yeah. But
So,
there are a lot of benefits to using it.
yeah.
When
So you're talking about using the structure all the time. It's tiresome. As other models. Um, that's basically what you said, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's your turn.
So it's my turn. Um, all right. So Edwin,
Listening.
I was struck by how you said, you know, there is interaction, Lou, in the group. I see interaction. There's like a collective, and there is the individual. And I see them as I see blurred boundaries. I don't see the collective and the individual. And in that sense, the we turns to something else than I know how you're feeling.
You're for you there's a blurred boundary between we and and an I or the individual, and that's I didn't understand more. That was
So I don't separate between the collective. Oh, the interaction is here. That's the physical place where we put the interaction. And this is the individual, how they feel and express themselves. It's like it's merging. It's there are blurred boundaries. It's all the time interaction. It's not, it doesn't belong only to the collective. Does it
Mm.
make sense?
Yeah, that you're seeing that both are sort of happening at the same time. The collective is happening as well as the individual is happening, and so there's a blurred boundary between the two.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. At the same time, I do understand the value of being so structured that we do have the individual expresses themselves at one point, and over time, I can relate to that. Over time, we are evolving and developing a dialogue of different perspectives. I can see that.
So you can see that we're giving space for the individual to express themselves, and over time, there's a dialogue, interaction happening, and you're seeing that.
Yeah. And I think all the like in the complaints we have, because I heard all of us saying that everything is like we criticize one another, everything is fast. We show, you know, we try to show I'm right and you are wrong. I interpret that as the specific culture we live in. That's the nature of this culture. It doesn't mean that it's the nature of human beings.
So you're seeing that sort of these criticisms, how people don't listen to each other, how they criticize each other. It's not just the nature of how people are. It's just something that's culturally created, or each culture is
Yeah,
maybe a little
it's
different.
context, in my opinion, it's contextual. And we were not born like that. Just this is the culture we live in.
Yeah, it's the culture we live in that created all the criticisms and kind of that people not listening to each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So now we need a structure to provide opportunity to be different. with one another. And I see the value of it.
And, how do we move from the existing culture to maybe a more empathic culture? And you see that maybe we do need some structure to kind of make that transition.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this statement brings up, I always have a student who asks me, oh, now we have the skills, but what do we do when we meet people who don't?
And so it's kind of bringing to mind, like, okay, we learned this skill maybe here in the empathy circle and what we're doing, but what do we do when we go out and meet people who don't have these skills?
Yeah, how does it help us?
Mhm.
Because they don't understand our language.
Yeah, you're bringing it back to the practical. How is this practical in everyday life, and how does it really help?
Yeah,
Okay,
thank
then
you.
that's fast 5 minutes. I'll speak to Tzofnat, back to you. So the way that the empathy circle helps, it's I would say in everyday life, it's like training wheels that we get on our training wheels, and it just helps us sort of ride the empathy, better. We're kind of learning skills to sort of embody that empathic way of being more.
Yeah, so you're talking about the framework of empathy circles, like training wheels. We train ourselves to embody empathy.
And I've seen it in the sense that it's almost like the empathy is like a battery. We have this need to be heard and seen. And so when we're in the empathy circle, it's like our empathy battery is being charged. Like, this is a little another metaphor. This is an empathy charging station, right? So
So you see there's an empathy charging station, like we all need, we have the need for acknowledgement, recognition. So the circle provides this opportunity to hook it up and charge that.
yeah. And then when you go out into the everyday life, you actually have people report all the time they have more capacity. They're more sensitive to see how the relationships are working. I mean, somebody mentioned going to their family, and usually they get right into conflict, but they're able to take a little bit of space and just listen to their father. I remember somebody was saying, because they had done the empathy circle, so they started applying it in these subtle little ways.
Yeah, so when you get out of the lab, then and you recharge, then you can deal more openly and in a relaxed mode and listen more to other people when you're outside.
Yeah, and also we can take the lab into society. We can turn all of society into a lab, right? And the way to do that is, can we get Donald Trump and Biden to have an empathy circle with each other, or Oprah and another movie star or something? Can we kind of spread the practice to the larger culture so people start seeing it and experiencing it, and sort of transform the culture, that the culture becomes like that empathy circle or the lab.
So you're talking about expanding the lab experience outside of the lab with celebrities. I wouldn't go to Trump, but maybe
I go to Trump. You got to think big.
It's too far of a step.
Yeah, so, and I did that. I ran for Congress under the empathy banner of the movement. And the first thing I did was invite the candidates to have empathy circle, take part in an empathy circle. So it's taking the practice. The practice is such that it's scalable, that you can go out and have others do it. And the people learn it by observation. So if we have high profile people doing it that have a lot of followers, their followers watch it and they kind of learn the practice and the mindset. So yeah, that's another step.
Yeah, so you're talking about taking these celebrities to be modeling and like a fishbowl, watching them practicing the empathy circle, and all their influencer, all their followers will watch it.
Yeah, and we can have the schools be teaching the practice and, building on it, spreading it that way. So the empathy circle is a sort of a minimal viable product, from business terminology, that it's highly expandable and scalable. It's very scalable
Yeah.
because you can do it with your family, you do it in your school, do it with your client, you can just really scale it.
Yeah, so you look at the empathy circle as a product that is scalable and can be marketed.
Yeah, there's in some of the business, you create your minimal viable product, right? The minimal thing that sort of works. And this is sort of the minimal sort of process. It's really minimal viable process. Yeah.
Yeah, you're saying it's a minimal viable process that can be scalable.
Yeah. That is so fast, that clock. Wow. Okay, I feel fully heard. I have time for one more before we close.
Yeah, I was wondering, so we have about 10 minutes left. I was wondering if we want to just have some conversation.
Okay, yeah, let's open it up for conversation. Sounds good.
So, can I ask you a question, Tzofnat?
Mm-hmm.
So, is there a modification that you would make to the empathy circle that would make it more relational?
It's too early for me to say. I'm learning.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely relate to the overtime thing. I
Mm-hmm.
do understand that in our culture, people don't have patience. They want it immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, that's what the structure for, to slow down and do things differently. So I appreciate that. Conceptually, philosophically, I'm not sure we are out of the bounded person. Like the unit of analysis is still in the individual. Can you see that? Can you see the unit of
I,
analysis is the
I
individual?
I do, and I'm appreciating actually that aspect of the conversation, like bringing my attention to that more. And I do think, I mean,
Mhm.
I think I see I look at things as a pendulum, so there's the pen, if the pendulum swings too far towards community and group relations, like that can be very oppressive. People feel controlled by the social context that they're in. And the other side of that pendulum is individuality and people that don't want to be part of groups and don't know how to be part of groups at all. And they think all that matters is their feelings and what they want, and they don't feel any connection to a larger kind of social responsibility. And I think Western culture, definitely has gone way on that side to the individuality side of the pendulum. But I think and I mean, you have a lot of, um,
But
this is your area, so I'm really interested to hear
yeah,
what you think about this.
so
But
you
both aren't
see,
aren't both important, individuality and collective?
it's not about collective and individual.
Okay,
That's the point. It's
okay.
about a relational point of view. You see, you see how our tendency is to either collective or individual, and I'm not talking about neither one of them. It's
Hmm.
taking life from a relational point of view, understanding that who we are is a product and in a process of interaction. It's not a collective. Collectivism is something else.
Is there a space that's highly relational? I mean, what kind of a space have you seen that would be this ideal awareness of the relational?
I'm not saying it's ideal. There are actually in my work, I criticize also social constructionists for taking too much of the relational perspective and not living anything for the personality or person. So for me, for me personally, it's hybrid. I'm looking at life as from a hybrid conceptual point of view, but it's definitely not collective or I. It's not that. It's about appreciating and recognizing that whatever happens is a product of relationships. Like, try to run everything in your life and what you do and what you think, even when you write a book, okay?
Yeah.
You sit on your own in your office. Is it relational?
Sure.
Asking. What do you think?
Well, it is in as so it is because everything that I am has to do with my life experience, and I didn't grow up on an island all by myself. So to so what
Yeah.
you're saying, I mean, I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I use the word collective and individual, maybe those were the wrong words, but what you just described as hybrid, which is we are both a product of our relationship, our relations, and we do have some sense of individuality or myself as a person. I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it makes the reason why we are talking about it, in my opinion,
Yeah.
is because in our culture, we have learned so much about the self, self-confidence, self, whatever, all those concepts,
Yeah.
that we neglected this so important component of how we are with one another in this culture. And I think we need to pay more attention to it. And I think the empathy circle is one offer to relate in a different way. I do think so.
Hmm.
It does offer that
Hmm.
in its own way. It does have the premise of individualism still, because that's what we know. This is the water we swim in. So it's
Well,
so
so
hard to get out of it. Yeah.
I want to challenge that assumption a little bit. So
Yeah.
you're saying because individual people speak that it reinforces individualism?
It's not because they speak. There's some assumption there that in many models, transformative mediation, for example, um, they think that the person have everything within. We just help them to reveal what they have. They just don't know what they have. And I question this assumption. I don't think people have everything inside. No, they don't. Because I come from a different background and you come from a different
Hmm.
background. And if we interact, maybe you find something interesting that is good for you and you never thought about it and you didn't have it inside.
Yes, and I would say human beings are naturally curious and they do that naturally, seek out. And people that don't do that, who are not curious, they are protecting themselves in some way, you know.
That's
And
right.
and so and the other thought I had with what you just said was, which had you talked about transformative something.
Mediation.
Relations,
Just
right,
an
right.
example.
Yes, I mean what I know about conflict is that conflict happens in relation, and when there's a
Exactly.
disconnect, the way that you mend it is by understanding more about each other. That is relational, you know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, one of the facets that we have in the model is relational empathy, to exactly what you're saying, that we are in relationship, right? Usually empathy is described individualistically, that there's one person, they're empathizing with a single person out there, and either you're doing it good or you're not, and you can do better at it. So that's sort of the typical, and I would say that's sort of an individualistic model. You're seeing the center of the discussion is the individual listening to the other person. And the empathy circle, we're all listening to each other. And I think there is a relationship of all three of us here. There's a quality of the relationship. And I do think that the empathy circle brings us into an awareness of that relationship. And that's a big part of the model, is that we want this constructive relationship with each other. We can have, there's all kinds of qualities of relationship. There's a domineering relationship where I'm the boss and you guys just do what I say and I get to do all the speaking. So that's a relationship too. And we can be aware of that relationship, or we can be aware of this relationship where everyone's being heard, and the quality of the relationship that we have with each other is an empathic, or a growing empathic relationship. So
Right, and now you are actually talking about the relational point of view. You're saying we have different types of or modes of relationship, and you are starting exploring them. That's what you just did, right? And that's what I want us to look more about what we co-creating. We, okay, that's a different we. What we in the interactions creating together, whether it's hierarchy or based on respect and equality or dignity, or whatever mode we want to co-create. I'm just questioning it. I want us to look at it and improve our relationships.
So one question for the
Reflection.
circle, one question in an empathy circle could be, how can we improve the relationships that we have to make it more trusting, more connecting, more open, more transparent, more, yeah. So we could ask that question, and that would be sort of an exploration of the three of us, or however many are in the circle.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and that raises for me the question of, what happens when you make requirements of people. So if you say, I require that you have this kind of relationship, or that you feel a certain way, or that you talk a certain way, or, how does that impact a person's willingness or ability to participate? So
Why are you using the verb require? Where did it come from?
Because that's what I worry about. I
You
worry
worry
about
about
people because I have a lot of experience with people
that?
resisting or not being willing to participate because they think. I mean, this is because they think they're required to talk about their feelings, or they're required to be intimate, or they're required to be vulnerable, or they're required to be a certain way in the circle. And if you're not doing that, then you're not doing the empathy circle right. Yeah.
And do you think that when I'm suggesting a relational point of view, that I suggest people to behave a certain way?
No, I'm not saying for sure. I'm saying that just got raised. I don't know what it would look like.
Oh,
I do know.
yeah.
I mean, I have heard people in empathy circles, not in the circle, but after the circle, complain that some people were not open, and some people were not, that some people weren't sharing their feelings, or they weren't very emotional. So the circle it wasn't a good circle,
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm very aware that part of having people actually go to those places, a big part of it is accepting where they are, and not having requirements. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So for an empathic relationship, I do think is built on trust. I think Louis hit it right. And the circle kind of builds trust over time, because, hey, I know I will be heard and there will be space for me. Right. And so I think it leads to sort of a relational, it's the quality of the relationship is a relationship built on an awareness of of the quality of the relationship. And there's certain premises towards relationality too, right? There's a sense that, hey, the relationship is important. Like having a constructive family relationship is valuable and it's important. And versus me being an individual out in the world, just getting what I can from myself. So I don't know if that's kind of fits with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that um, so the work that I've done with leadership training and kind of personal transformation, you know, a lot of people develop the strategy of being super individual and super self-contained. You know, they develop that strategy because growing up in their family, they were not supported, and they were not, the family was not a source of support and love and recognition, acknowledgement, being seen, and
Right.
coping with difficulty. So their strategy that they developed for coping with difficulty was do it on my own. You know, I do it myself, and that's part of the origin of that kind of thing too, of not trusting that others are going to be there for you, or listen to you, or understand you, or accept you.
And also we are encouraged in our society, in our context or culture, to be independent.
Yeah, yeah,
That,
I agree.
many, you can look at many,
Yeah,
even voting. Why are we voting at the age of 18? Why? It's because of the same premise that now we're independent enough and we can make a decision on our own.
mhm,
So many things in our society rely on us being independent. We are not taught or being educated to be interdependent, do we? It's more like if we are, our connections with others are presented as we are conditioned or subject to others. That's the form or the mode of relationships, not as being, as developing healthy interdependence.
yeah,
Well, for
yeah,
the training, that is one of the components is relational empathy. So that might be something you want to focus on. Like, how do we explain relational empathy within the context of the empathy circle? So
Mm-hmm.
does
Mm-hmm.
that sound reasonable or of interest? Or
Yeah, I would say it's looking at empathy from a relational perspective, which is like a transformation between inner and outer dialogue. It's like the blurred boundaries I talked about before, like being able to contain the uncertainty and the the relationship being in flux and changing.
but that's sort of based on, again, on that trust, right? The more trusting we are, the more open we can be and more transparent. And like, I'm not just going to open up my feelings to everybody because like, I don't trust you. I don't know what you're going to do with it, you know? But if I know that I'm going to be heard and it's kind of a safe place to be heard, I'm willing to kind of be more open and transparent, and you become more open and transparent, and it becomes more open, and that openness and transparency has more of a, more of a flow between people. So I think the empathy circle helps build that trust.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can't dictate like, hey, be relational, it's like
No, you
we
don't.
got you got to have some way of developing that sort of a sensitivity and an awareness, it seems.
It's not even prescriptive, what I'm saying.
right.
It's more descriptive. It's just suggesting to take another angle at looking at our interactions and reality.
And
Instead
how
of
do you get
taking the
from
point of view, what?
no, go ahead, Finn. I just thought you were done. Go
I'm,
ahead, finish.
yeah, I'm saying instead of taking the dominant individual point of view, take a relational, what we co-create. It's very relevant for conflicts. Because many times in conflict, people blame one another, saying it's you to blame because you did X, Y, Z.
Mhm.
But everything is interactional, so we need to, and if you did something, I responded it in a certain way, and then you responded, and then I responded. So we co-create something, whether it's high quality, meaningful or not, that's a different story. But it's something we cannot look at conflict only from an individual perspective.
But how do you want to move from that individual perspective to a relational awareness? Like, how do you get from that to that?
It's just to look at our interactions, which we often don't do. We
Okay.
look at the individual.
So you would say, like in an empathy circle, let's talk about what our interactions are here in the circle. And that would lead towards it.
It's more complicated. It's like, but that's another, it's a whole
Another
another
discussion.
conversation. I can give a few examples from other models. Because before the section I sent you about empathy, there is a whole section about wholeness, about the person as a whole, as opposed to being perfect. That's actually the introduction for why I'm suggesting empathy, transformative empathy. So it's like building blocks.
Okay.
Well, I need to go.
Yeah. To be
Yeah.
continued.
I've loved this conversation, and I'd love to do more.
We're
and
back
understand
next
more,
week.
and grateful, Tzofnat, for having a chance to talk to you. I really respect
Yeah, same
your
here.
background and your experience, and I'm learning from talking to you. And I mean, I think what I got kind of at the end here is you're saying it might be just a matter of raising people's awareness of thinking about the relational aspect. It might not be actually changing anything functionally, but in terms of the words that we use to describe things and what we're bringing attention to the relational aspect of it, as opposed to just whatever language we might be using that emphasizes individuality more. Is that right?
It's all about perspective. It
Okay.
starts with perspective. It doesn't mean that you don't need to change your action, but even inclusion, I'm teaching inclusion too. It's about perspective, first of all. So yeah, changing your perspective has impact on how you relate to the other.
Sure. Yeah, so I'd love to talk
Mhm.
more, and I'd love to.
Yeah.
Are you going to be back next week?
I have to look at my calendar. I know it's like you planning on meeting every
Ongoing.
Friday.
Same time.
Ongoing for how long?
I don't know. We'll see. There's no end time. I
Okay.
think this will turn into the training course
Yeah.
eventually. Eventually, this will be
Okay.
the time slot
Yeah.
maybe for the
Yeah.
training.
Yeah, I came on board after you decided on Fridays. Fridays are not the best for me now that I'm here. Once I move back to Portland, it's different. But at the moment, it's more difficult for me. Fridays.
Okay, well, let us know if it
Okay.
works. It's just this is the time that worked for kind of
For
other
all of
people
you.
too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
So hopefully we can.
Tzofnat, I have one other thing I want to ask you. So I have an Israeli friend that I know that we're talking about conversation, and she said in Israel, if you wait until I'm done talking to say something, you're not interested in what I'm saying. Would you agree with that?
I can see where it's coming from. People don't have the patience. It's very tense. Society. Yeah, it's more challenging than what I saw in the US. Yeah.
And in
Unfortunately.
California,
Yeah.
we're slower here.
Slower, and in Portland too.
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Okay.
It's really interesting because in Israel they go to meditate and go to a retreat, and it's very popular here, to do meditation and stuff, but have no patience when you open your mouth They won't listen to you. It's such a, I don't know how to explain that.
Okay.
So,
Alrighty. See you
All
next week then,
Bye-bye.
or
well,
by
we
email.
continued.
I'll be posting this
Have a great
online
weekend.
too. Yeah, you too.